Jonathan, let me just start by saying a big thank you to you for joining us for a show of the Responsible Edge. I know you and I met some time ago. As I mentioned, seasons have passed since our first meeting. It's great to finally have you on the show.
Absolutely. Yeah, really appreciate the opportunity to be on the show. And we're very excited as an organization to have Seneca ESG join the Anti-Greenwash Charter. So happy to jump on and share a few thoughts.
Fantastic stuff, Jonathan. Fantastic stuff. And thank you for the immediate plug for the Anti-Greenwash Charter straight off the bat. That was absolutely perfect. For any of our listeners out there, I haven't encouraged Jonathan to do that, just for clarity. Jonathan, let's kick things off though. First sort of 20 minutes or so, we're going to try and give our listeners a real sort of sense of you and your background. I know that you've done various things throughout your career. You've done lots of interesting things, especially with the lens of kind of the role that ethics and responsible practice and sustainability has played in your decision making. Start wherever you like. It can go back to formative experiences in childhood, or perhaps at higher education, or even into the beginning parts of your career. But just talk us through a bit about you, your background, and what's inspired you to do what you do.
Sure, happy to do so. So a bit about myself. I was born and raised in California in the States. Grew up there most of my formative years, I would say, and studied computer engineering and economics at UPenn on the East Coast, and really got a good hands-on experience of what engineering is all about. So that was really the beginnings of a lifelong passion for technology, which still continues to today, and have then added to that an MBA. So having a background in business is also especially important when I've now have gone down the path of starting my own company, which is Seneca ESG, and also have achieved my CFA charter as well. So that gave me a good financial background. And throughout most of my career, I've had this great opportunity to be able to apply my background in either computer engineering, technology, or finance to the various jobs, roles, endeavors that I've put my time into. And I feel very fortunate for that. But there was something missing. And Seneca, I would say, is a culmination of finding that missing piece that I was looking for, that I was striving for. And what that missing piece was for me is to do something fulfilling, to do something that I feel proud of, something that I feel motivated for, and as well as having a passion for, and just be able to get up, every morning and feel really excited, pumped up, to get into the office and start working on things. Not to say that, the other jobs that I've had, the other, roles that I've had didn't excite me. Certainly they did, some way, shape, or form. But I found that working in sustainability really allowed me to fulfill, that wish that I had, which is to do something that I find meaningful from a long-term perspective, something that I, can feel proud about, that I can share with my friends and family and say, hey, this is something that I really, am proud of. And a bit more on that, having grown up in California, it certainly has a reputation for being more progressive when it comes to sustainability issues and ESG. And certainly, that has had an impact on my own thinking. But there's a few other things that also impacted my affinity for sustainability. And first and foremost, it's my own mother. So way back when I was a young kid in California at daycare, actually, in elementary school. This is I'm dating myself a little bit here. But this is in the mid 80s. And my mom, working for Apple at the time, took time out of her schedule, actually, several times to visit the daycare in the middle of the afternoon, because she wanted to spearhead a new recycling program, which recycling was not a new thing, by that point, of course. But it also wasn't a very prevalent thing, I would say. It's not that every corporate had a recycling program and had those bins, basically on every floor and at every cafeteria, which is the case now. It would be odd if you didn't see that, at every corporate office nowadays, not just in California, but in most places globally. So it was a relatively new thing, and it certainly wasn't adopted across the board. And I thought that was really interesting. I did notice, having my mom there at 3 p.m. in the afternoon was a bit odd, when normally she wouldn't come pick me up until 6, 7 p.m. So something struck a chord. There's a reason why my mom is here and talking to the staff and helping to set up these bins. But it was later that I realized that my mom felt passionate enough about the idea of recycling to take time out of her busy day to set this program up at my daycare. And it's funny because when I asked her about it and I brought this up, it was just recently that I shared this with my mom, that I thought that was a really big impact on me. That's something that I still remember to this day. She doesn't even recall that she did that. So I mean, there's so many things that I'm sure that she had in mind and had helped to carry forward that not all of them are probably necessarily a strong memory, a core memory, as some people call it. But it was certainly a core memory for myself. So that was.
Jonathan, let me jump in there. That is, it's so, I mean, I don't think we've had anyone going back to, so you're what, 4 or 5 years old at this point?
I think I was 6 or 7 years old.
6 or 7. Okay.
Yeah.
That's a very, I mean, to have such a sort of a crystal clear, by the way, I laugh because I have exactly the same situation with my mum where I tell her, oh, do you remember this? And she's got absolutely no idea. So I'm
right.
A parental privilege, if you like.
Exactly.
But I think that's fascinating that really, that seeded something in you that I want to just talk about. Then, you then go through your education, and obviously you're looking at computer engineering and looking at, the financial side of things and that's sort of what you built, and business. And that's what you kind of built your education. When was it always bubbling underneath that you had this kind of sort of drive and determination to get back to doing something in the sustainability space? Was that part of the long-term thinking that eventually you would, or was it something that you kind of re-engaged with later in life with other influences?
It was more the latter. I wish I could say that I had this crystal clear image of myself of what I would be doing, in my later, career, and that being sustainability related. But that was really a journey that I went through. And I'm sure it's probably the case for most people out there that work in ESG or sustainability, that there were some, elements that probably contributed to it here and there, but it just wasn't really clear in my mind until maybe just as recent as 5 years ago, that this is a space that I really feel passionate about and that I want to be in. And to add to that initial core memory of my mom setting up that recycling program, there's a book that was very impactful on me, very inspirational for me to have read, which is called Let My People Go Surfing by Yvon Chouinard. So he is the founder of Patagonia, which most people now know as the premier outdoor brand for outerwear, for active equipment, climbing equipment, so on and so forth. But the book to me was so inspirational because here was this accidental businessman who had really no interest in creating any kind of business, let alone a multi-billion-dollar enterprise. And he merely just wanted to hang out with his friends and enjoy nature and go climbing and go hiking and camping and really just enjoy nature. And it was really out of necessity that he found that there was a need for better climbing equipment, safer climbing equipment, more sustainable climbing equipment that would allow people to enjoy the outdoors, yet do so in a way as to not negatively impact the nature and surroundings that they were enjoying, right? And so that ethos that they began with still continues to this day. And many of the things that he outlined in the book as to new principles and policies that they espouse when they were building Patagonia was very groundbreaking at the time that they did it. Things such as work-life balance. At the time, even the term work-life balance hadn't yet been coined, yet they were already doing it, right? So they were thinking about how do you do flex time? How do you take care of situations where, there's a new parent, and should they have some time off? Yes, probably. Should they have the ability to still do some work and be compensated fairly for it? Yes, probably. So they were really the pioneers in a lot of these ways. And it has a lot to do with how he ended up with the title, Let My People Go Surfing. And I'm paraphrasing now, and hopefully I don't screw it up too badly. But the anecdote is that there are a lot of these Patagonia offices that were situated very close to maybe the seaside or maybe the mountains, just because a lot of the people that initially work at Patagonia, and probably still to this day, have a love of nature. And it could be in the middle of the week, a random Tuesday or Wednesday afternoon. You look out the window or you hear from a buddy of yours that the surf is just breaking perfectly. It's just a combination of beautiful weather and relatively, safe. And also the break is just perfect for, catching that nice wave. You know what? Just go out there. It's work will be here. It will be here waiting for you. Just go out there, enjoy it. Because more than likely, you'll come by the office again later and make up for it. There's a certain degree of trust and respect that is afforded, to your colleagues and team members when you give them that ownership, over their work and their ability to achieve company objectives while still enjoying themselves, in overall, sort of work-life balance sort of way. And I thought that was amazing when I read that. And
Jonathan, when did you? Sorry, just for context, when did you read this? When was this?
This was, I would say 6 years ago, 5 or 6 years ago.
Okay. So just pre-Seneca.
Yeah, exactly.
Sort of began to trigger the thinking of, I want to do something.
That's right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And I think what that helped me realize is that it is possible to have a successful business and also do good and be mindful and also take care of people, right? And be respectful, right? It doesn't have to be this all or nothing approach, where we're all very focused on just building a successful business, or we are doing things in a way that is very mindful and sustainable. In fact, there is a way to do both. It's not easy. There's a lot of trade-offs sometimes, and the world is of course filled with trade-offs, and that's very, very natural. But as long as you are recognizing that there are opportunities to be able to achieve both and spend time in endeavoring to do so, you can do a lot of good, and you can create organizations that are very successful and very sustainable.
And Jonathan, and that, by the way, that was positioned so beautifully and eloquently. That was so well introduced. I've got a few questions, but I want to ask you about Patagonia. You mentioned those trade-offs there. Yeah. What trade-offs do you see that Patagonia, or you might have read that you think Patagonia have had to accept in order to be what they are?
Well, one is the way that it's one of those situations where it seems like a trade-off at first, where you're having to compromise, for example, profitability. And you're thinking, well, that's a very common trade-off that people think about when they think about ESG. ESG is often viewed as a cost center. If I hadn't done all these things, we'd have more profit, right? And I think in the short term, that is absolutely true. A lot of things related to ESG, such as employee health and safety, diversity, and training and education. These things are, it costs money to implement these programs, and you might not necessarily see any sort of tangible economic benefit from it, at least not in the short term. But in the medium to long term, I absolutely believe that there are benefits that come from that. It's from having a more cohesive work environment. It's avoiding a lot of the challenges that come about when it comes to finding great talent, and very importantly, retaining good talent. And it gives people more of a sense that this is a long-term career for them, rather than a job that might just be a stepping stone, I should say, to another job, right? So that's one example to give. But there's other elements of ESG that are also long-term beneficial, even from an economic standpoint, to a company. And it's the reason why a lot of CFOs, the CFO office is oftentimes getting very involved in ESG nowadays. And we hear this actually from a lot of our customers and potential customers, that the CFO's office is getting involved. And it's very simple, because you only need to look at what impact does an ESG rating, for example, have on a company's brand and on a company's, of course, stock price. So when a stock price could be impacted, either positively or negatively by ESG, certainly that falls within the purview of the CFO's office, because their cost of capital could rise, their obviously company valuation could be impacted. These are all things that are very much within the wheelhouse of the CFO's office. The conversation as to whether and how ESG should have an impact on a company's stock price is probably a debate for another day. So I'm certainly not here saying that morally or ethically that there should be impact from an ESG rating downgrade or upgrade on the stock price. I have a couple of thoughts on that myself, but it's perhaps outside the scope of this conversation.
We can always have you back on for show number 2, Jonathan. I think we would love to already, I think. Let me just ask you, I want to pry a little bit back into your professional experience before the reading of the book and of starting Seneca. What was it, if you think back to your experiences of working in the roles that you had previously, like what were the main sort of observations that you had around working in that context that have affected the way that you've looked to develop your own company? What have been the main sort of motivations or trigger points, if you like, from your previous experience?
Sure. Yeah. So prior to starting Seneca, I had worked primarily in management consulting as my main job role and career. And that was especially helpful to forming an idea of what I wanted to do with my career. And the reason being, management consulting really gives you so many opportunities to basically test out different types of sectors, industries, geographies that you may want to work in. And it's a bit like speed dating for your career. You may not know exactly, which path you want to take just yet, but it's amazing in that it basically gives you every 3 to 6 to 12 months a new opportunity to try out. And for myself, I've had experience working in financial services, in the public sector, in heavy industrial manufacturing, in military even, so naval and aviation in particular, specific to military applications, and telecom as well. So there's so many different experiences that I've had from having been a management consultant for 12 plus years, that it allowed me to focus a bit on what I wanted to do once I decided to leave consulting. And initially, it was something that I knew that had to do with technology. So when I left the consulting world and started my first company called Red Pulse, that is a foray into fintech, which is really the hot thing that everyone was talking about maybe a decade ago. And that was great because it allowed me to marry my experience in finance, because actually quite a lot of my time spent as a management consultant was in financial services, even though there's quite a bit of variety sector-wise. But it allowed me to marry my work experience in finance and having also studied my MBA and obtained my CFA charter with my background in technology. So undergrad, I studied computer and telecom engineering, and building Red Pulse into a financial markets data analytics platform was really interesting to me because it gave me this opportunity to apply a lot of what I learned and also experienced in the earlier part of my career. And that was great. And it was a good segue into Seneca, because Seneca, I still consider to be a fintech company, because there's obviously a technology component, given that Seneca is a software company. There is also a financial component, because it was maybe 5-6 years ago when I first came up with the idea of Seneca that I came to realize that, hey, now there seems to be starting to be quite a bit of overlap in conversations that I've been having across the topics of not just finance and technology, but also sustainability now. And we talked a little bit about how sustainability and finance has some overlap. And when I started to realize that as that overlap continues to grow, and very much driven by regulatory policy, there is a component of technology that is at play as well, because of how pervasive sustainability is becoming across an organization. And so when a concept such as sustainability starts to touch so many different aspects of an organization, and much of it is regulatory driven as well, there is growing, I would say, logistical challenges with managing such a vast amount of data related to sustainability and ESG, not just for compliance purposes, but also for internal management decision-making purposes. And I thought, wow, anytime you see pain points, challenges when it comes to managing data, managing workflows, I mean, you immediately just think of technology, right? Software as a solution. And I thought, hey, this is an opportunity. I want to get into it. It seems to tick all the boxes that really excite me and make me passionate about finance, technology, sustainability. This is amazing. I have to find something to do in this space. It wasn't as clear cut as what we're doing today. I didn't have this necessarily, clear vision that, hey, I'm going to go and create a software as a solution business, software as a service business that is focused on sustainability. But eventually that's what we settled upon as a vision. And now we've made it a reality.
Jonathan, it's awesome. You're a fantastic guest. You're one of these people that we can just sort of kick you off, and you just speak so beautifully and clearly about your experience. Classic thing that we've done. We've obliterated our 20 minutes to talk about you, but it's been fascinating. I just want to ask you one more question. I had many others, but one more question. When you obviously a very entrepreneurial guy, you've had previous experience in management consulting. When you get to the end of your career and you're able to look back on kind of what you've done, what do you want to be able to say about what you did?
Yeah, I want to be able to say that I've made an impact, a positive impact, ideally. So that doesn't necessarily mean it has to be a huge impact. So the way that I characterize the work that we do to everyone, including my own team members, is we should feel proud about what we do, because even if we have a small handful of clients that we maintain versus we have 10,000 clients that we maintain, that is a positive impact. Back when we first began 4+ years ago as a company, we were struggling to get our first client. And when we finally did, that was really a watershed moment for us, because then I could actually say with confidence and with truth that the work that we've done is now directly positively impacting the world. It may not be at the scale of impact that we want just yet, and we have very big ambitions for how much scale we want to achieve when it comes to that impact. But strictly based upon the definition of positive impact, even having had that impact on a single company is meaningful, because that company has shareholders, it has a board of directors, it has a management team, it has employees, it has customers, it has suppliers, it has partners. All of those individuals in those different roles in relation to this company have now had some degree of positive impact, I believe, from having worked with us, right? And so then you can apply that to all the many additional customers we've now engaged with since then, and that's just an amazing feeling.
Jonathan, I couldn't agree with you more. I think we talk about this internally at the Charter. We've, as you say, got grand ambitions. We see the adoption of a green claims policy as something that we want to see ideally, we see adopted worldwide by organizations that take their environmental claims seriously. Right. But I'm absolutely with you that we really need to focus in on the impact that we're having on the organizations that we're working with so far. That's still significant. That's still us changing the way that people are viewing, in our instance, communications and how they approach it. So no, that's so good to hear that somebody else building something within the sustainability space is viewing it in a similar light. Jonathan, as I said, we've done the brilliant thing of going way over our 20 minutes talking about you, but I think it was absolutely fascinating. And thank you so much for being so open and sharing such insight into your experience and background. Would you mind now introducing our listeners to the Thomson Reuters article from, I think, this month, talking about Gen AI and its impact on ESG? Would you mind just introducing the article to our listeners and then pulling out whatever the most interesting salient points were from the piece for you?
Yes, absolutely. So the article that we'll be chatting about is called How Gen AI, and that's short for generative AI, is transforming ESG reporting and compliance. And so this is an article written and shared by Thomson Reuters. And some of the highlights I can just share as a preface here include the growing importance and data demands of ESG, Gen AI's role in ESG management, and use cases and benefits of Gen AI in ESG. And this article is particularly salient for me and Seneca ESG because we as a software company do also employ AI in some of our features. So I think I'm pretty well positioned to be able to share at least one perspective of how AI is starting to add value to the ESG workflows and overall value chain.
Brilliant stuff, Jonathan. Thank you for introducing the piece. I'm going to start with what I consider to be the sort of the main critique, if you like, that I understand that people would have of really the application of Gen AI within any context, and I think very much so specifically within the ESG space. How can companies, in your experience, how can companies ensure that, going down the automation, the Gen AI sort of supported route when it comes to ESG reporting, how can they make sure that by doing that, they're realizing the benefit without overlooking, if you like, the nuanced qualitative aspects of sustainability, and to make sure that they get that balance right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that really is the crux of the discussion right now, because just to lay out a bit some of the benefits and the pitfalls so that we can get a little bit of a deeper dive into the discussion as to how it should be used potentially. So the benefits, of course, is that a lot of these ESG related tasks are very repetitive in nature. And that can consist of things such as data inquiries, from your supply chain partners, from your customers, from your shareholders. You could be a PE backed or PE owned company, and there may be some reporting requirements there. And from what we've gathered from a lot of our customers, that is becoming more and more of an issue, because typically the sustainability team might just be 2 or 3 people. They don't have any plans to scale that up necessarily just for the purpose of responding to inquiries. And they're looking for some technology-driven solution that can help with that. So that would be helpful. That would be amazing if they could rely upon some AI-driven solution to help address and respond to a lot of these constant inbound inquiries related to ESG. So that's one. Another is the fact that ESG reporting, it is important, it is valuable, it does take a lot of time. And while it is true that there are some similarities to financial reporting in that this is also for the purpose of regulatory compliance, it's for the purpose of information disclosure to the market at large, and to allow for investors, shareholders, and other stakeholders to have a better understanding of the company's operations, right? To make those decisions, whether it be investment or partnering, so on and so forth. That being said, sustainability data can also be very qualitative in nature. A lot of the data that is being collected and disseminated when we're looking at ESG reports, it's not necessarily all quantitative data. In fact, far from it. A lot of the data is actually quite qualitative in that it's asking for descriptions of things. It's asking for explanations of things. Please describe your approach to biodiversity and impact, and explain how the actions that you've taken and the programs that you've initiated actually help that topic, or improve the current way in which you're impacting that particular topic. That is difficult to manage as a process. It's also difficult to digest if you are a reader of that report. It's also difficult to analyze, right? And how do you make comparisons between that company and others, or that company and benchmark, right? So there's a lot of challenges associated with that, born out of the sheer fact that much of the information that we look to capture for is not quantitative, it's actually qualitative. So Gen AI can also be helpful in that regard, in that it can help you to understand better what is the question asking. It could help you with forming the answer or assessing it, giving you examples. But now let's talk about the pitfalls, the downsides of using Gen AI. And something that the article, I would say, neglects to really go into in any degree of specificity or depth. But I'm happy to go into that because it's something that we're constantly thinking about as well, as a software provider that employs AI, that there is a potential risk of being too cavalier in employing AI, specifically Gen AI, when it comes to sustainability reporting. And the first that comes to mind typically is greenwashing. Okay, so this technology, it is so impressive. It is so capable of producing content. That's the gen part of AI. What is the difference between generative AI and AI? Well, generative AI is a subset of AI that focuses specifically on creation of content, the automated creation of content. So when we have this lingering potential for greenwashing, whether that's intentional or not, Gen AI, if not used properly, could be helping to exacerbate that issue, unfortunately, rather than fix it. Because for a company that may be struggling with what is the right response to this question, what's the right way to characterize our company, in this regard, well, I don't have an idea. Maybe I just look to the Gen AI and have it write something for me. Well, that would be terrible. That is not what I think. This is just my personal opinion, what Gen AI should be used for when it comes to ESG and when it comes to sustainability reporting. Far from it. That would just further exacerbate this idea of greenwashing. Now, the question is, how do we prevent that? How do we put some guardrails into the application of Gen AI when it comes to ESG? That's something that Seneca is also currently researching. So we're constantly taking feedback from our existing customers that have begun to use our AI assistant that we've launched a couple months back, called Marcus AI, and giving us feedback as to what's helpful, what's not, maybe even some areas where they think that it could actually use a bit more guardrails. And that's something that we constantly take as feedback and have a very tight product development loop that incorporates that feedback so that we can make those changes in a very quick fashion.
Jonathan, it's awesome. It's great to hear that you guys are both utilizing these generative AI, as you say, but equally you're very much aware of, the need to be sensitive to its use and careful, essentially. And I think that's brilliant. Well, it's interesting. Well, you mentioned greenwashing. We actually now have a section required in all of our signatories green claims policies around responsible use of generative AI when producing content. So
Fantastic.
Every one of our stakeholders of the organizations that we're working with can ultimately understand how they as an organization are choosing to approach it in order to ensure that the guardrails are there to make sure that content's not produced that is greenwashing. So it's great to hear that we're on the same page in that sense. Just to reflect slightly on, and I want to come back to the pitfalls, but I think you introduced them so beautifully. I want to talk about the benefit here. One of the things that really strikes me in conversations that I've had with numerous people working in sustainability, and especially with the CSRD initiative in Europe and the impact that that's having, there is almost this polarization, if you like, of the role of sustainability, if you like, within organizations, where the compliance and reporting side has become so enormous and so big that actually the kind of original focus for sustainability functions within organizations, which is innovation and creativity and coming up with new, problem-solving initiatives, that we've almost got sort of weighed down, if you like, by the compliance reporting. And are we spending enough time on the other key area? Is it too simple for me to say, Jonathan, that the absolute wonder of Gen AI is the prospect of supporting compliance and reporting to such an extent, obviously done appropriately with the right guardrails in place, that ultimately it frees up our sustainability professionals to focus on innovation and creativity and problem solving? Just touch on that. Is that have I oversimplified it, or is that the scenario here?
No, not at all. I think that was a very apt explanation, and something that Seneca ESG is very much aligned with. And in fact, I would broaden that scope to not just include Gen AI, but just technology solutions in general. Because even before Seneca ESG began to implement some aspects of AI in our features, the software tool already was intended to reduce the logistical burden of having to manage an ESG function within a corporate organization. And much of that burden stems from having to manage such a large database of ESG data across various business lines, physical locations, hierarchies, and then having that data be able to aggregate and be prepared in such a way to be regulatory compliant. We found that there were literally thousands of hours being spent on just managing that process alone. And as you just very rightly put it, there was very little time left over for innovation, for improvement, which I might add is one of the ways in which Seneca, I think, differentiates ourselves from the rest of the market, where we do have a very strong focus on the compliance goal, CSRD compliance, for example, and helping to create reports that are in adherence with some of these global best practices, such as GRI, SASB, IFRS. That being said, we have a twin goal at Seneca, which is to promote continuous improvement in sustainability practices. And I think a lot of the other solutions out there, they stop short just at the compliance part. And they view ESG software and ESG as a concept as essentially a compliance exercise. Tick the box, and we wash our hands of it until the next reporting cycle. For us, that is a missed opportunity. It's a missed opportunity because once you've identified what is your current state of sustainability practices, you're not done. In fact, that's the best opportunity to do an assessment as to how you can be better, because you know what you're doing today. What is your goal for becoming a better organization, a more sustainable organization, a more mindful organization over the next 3 to 5 years? And to have that plan put in place beyond just the carbon aside, I think the exception to that general observation is that companies now are mandated to have a very forward-looking and clear plan for carbon reduction, even to the hopefully to the end goal of carbon net zero. But that should be applied to the rest of ESG at large. And ESG is much greater than just carbon. Carbon is incredibly important. Greenhouse gas emissions management is incredibly important. And getting to the goal of carbon emissions reduction and eventually to net zero is incredibly important. But when we're talking about the greater concept of ESG, there's a lot of other things that a company could have the opportunity to understand better about itself and to improve about itself.
And it lends itself, Jonathan, just drawing ties, if you like, to when you introduced and talked about Patagonia earlier, and we were talking about the trade-offs, and we were talking about essentially it's organizations that take a long-term view of the way that they want to develop themselves that are essentially the ones that are going to win this game in the sense of implementing sound ESG strategies. And it sounds to me like, and I'm plugging Seneca ESG myself now with this, but it sounds like your platform is the platform, in light of what you've just said, for organizations that are prepared to think about not the next compliance reporting cycle, but to actually be thinking about, right, well, having done this piece of work and been supported by this platform and perhaps pulling from the article, generative AI, now let's think about how we can really improve from a long-term perspective. And that's essentially what you guys are facilitating through Seneca. Let me understand just quickly though, how does that play out in practicalities? Like, what do you get, like additional reports on recommendations for things that you can do to improve, or how does it manifest in Seneca ESG for that sort of ways of improving?
Sure. So to stay on the carbon topic, actually, we have a feature called hotspot identification. So it tracks the emission sources and the data related to that across the entire organization over time. So it can see if there's some out of bound, so to speak, changes to the emissions that may be cause for concern. And it could be a yellow flag, could be a red flag indicator within our system. And it gives a much more easily digestible way for the management team to be able to surface the types of notifications and areas that they may need to address much more efficiently, much more frequently than they might have access to otherwise, if they were to do so in a more manual fashion. So right from the get-go, having that technology solution to give that sort of insight to the management team is especially useful to help them to understand better what are some problem areas across the organization. The second approach is to take all the data that is being provided by the organization over time and use AI to identify areas for improvement. So this is a more proactive approach. You can say that the first feature that I mentioned, hotspot identification, is more reactive in that something has happened, and typically we would want to be notified immediately if something bad is happening, right? And so that's more reactive. But we also want to take a proactive approach, which is, well, nothing necessarily bad has happened. but we also don't see much improvement in certain areas where the AI may actually have had some prior precedent.
Oh, Jonathan.
Oh, sorry about that.
Sorry, you just went. If we'll just, it was probably you were just getting towards. Oh, where were you?
Proactive.
Yeah, proactive. Yeah, if you wouldn't mind just talking yourself back in, that'd be great.
Yeah, no problem. So the first solution that I mentioned, the first feature called hotspot identification, that is more of a reactive approach to the data that we're collecting. And that still is useful because it's a much more efficient manner of surfacing these types of insights that would be really useful for a management team to be aware of if and when that happens, right? And they can take action. But a proactive approach would be to take that same data over a course of time, a duration of time, and see where there might be opportunities to improve the organization to either avoid potential pitfalls in the future or to take advantage of opportunities to improve in a very efficient manner. So when you look at an overall organization or any system for that matter, there's usually just a few areas that you should really focus on first to really get the most bang for your buck, so to speak, where you probably don't need to put in too much time or investment, but the impact of that is quite outsized compared to other changes you can make in the organization. So that allows for a much more proactive approach to improving your state of sustainability practices. And that's something that is very much aligned with what I said earlier that differentiates Seneca ESG from a lot of other solutions providers in this space, and that we are not solely focused on just compliance as a goal. It's also continuous improvement as a goal.
Well, it sounds like a very good position to find yourself in, because I can imagine that once the world of sustainability settles, if you like, when it comes to the compliance and reporting side of things, it's then really going to be those that have been supporting with improvement and innovation and creativity and thinking that will win the race. So I'm excited to see how that plays out for you guys moving forward. Jonathan, can you believe we've already spoken for like 48 minutes, which has obliterated our normal timescale? So I know we've only just touched the surface on the use of generative AI in ESG reporting, but I think ultimate headlines from you, which have been fantastic, are let's not be afraid of it, but let's be responsible in its use and make sure the guardrails are there. But ultimately, the impact of utilizing generative AI could be significant broadly for the ESG reporting sector. I've done a terrible job of regurgitating what you so eloquently put together, but that's essentially the headline I think I've pulled from it. Let's finish off, though, with the magic wand question. So, Jonathan, if I was to hand you that magic wand and you could change one thing about the corporate world this instant, what would that one thing be?
Great question. So if I had a magic wand, I would want there to be a direct incentive between incentive connection, I should say, between corporate behavior and happiness in society. Mm-hmm. I was initially going to say sustainability, concepts and topics, but I'm going to say happiness, because this is that big goal, right? And really, if I had a magic wand, then I'm going to shoot for something that's quite big, in terms of its impact, and maybe even potentially, at least right now, in terms of what we have available to us, near impossible to achieve. But I do think having that really, really, big, lofty goal is a way for us to frame how we can be improving some of these processes, some of the government policies, the incentive structures, information flow, and last but not least, technology solutions to help us achieve that goal.
Jonathan, let me ask you, it's a brilliant, I love it when we get a magic wand suggestion that we haven't had before, and that is a fairly unique one. Let me ask you, what it is a difficult question maybe to answer, but what in your mind are the key characteristics that make up, that notion of happiness within a person's experience that a corporate organization could influence?
Sure. I think happiness can be drawn from a lot of different feelings, one of which is a feeling of security. Do I feel that I live in an environment and my family lives in an environment where we feel safe and safe to be able to express ourselves and to work in a capacity that fulfills us, and to do so without fear, right? Mm-hmm. And to do so with a fair amount of freedom and with a fair amount of equality. And I've heard a lot of debates about, what is more important, freedom versus equality. And, sometimes, you can really work yourself into a corner as to, is it really a choice between the two? But again, another topic for another time. But I think there's room for both, and it's probably a healthy dose of both that is necessary to ensure that there's a high degree of happiness that is allowed for in society. Now, how does corporate behavior connect to that? Well, that's really the difficult question, right? That's something that is outside of my own ability to solve for. But if there's some small way that I can be a contributing component, to that eventual solution, that would make me so proud.
Well, Jonathan, I'll jump in there. I think that the work that you're doing with Seneca ESG is contributing towards that, because if you're talking about security being a core component of one's happiness, then the influence that you're having, not just on compliance and reporting, but as you quite rightly have highlighted, the innovation and the improvement, et cetera, for organizations to take, that's contributing towards us ultimately developing a more sustainable environment for us all to feel secure within. So and therefore happier in. So for me, yeah, you're already part of the magic wand solution that you're working towards. Jonathan, we've got over 50 minutes, so I'm going to have to cut it there. That was an absolutely brilliant conversation. Thank you so much for joining us for this morning's show.
No worries. Thank you so much, Charlie, for the opportunity.